Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Great Shot Kid, the podcast on the Nerd Party Network that is dedicated to looking at the non-Star Wars work of Star Wars creators, although sometimes we do Star Wars stuff that they did too, but, you know, that's sort of the gray area we go to sometimes. But anyway, I'm one of your hosts, John.
And I'm Mike.
And this week, we are going to be discussing the lost 1990s gem, story by George Lucas, executive produced by George Lucas, Radioland Murders, starring Brian Benben and a whole cast of people you recognize but have trouble naming on occasion.
Oh, Mary Stuart Masterson.
Well, besides her. But you know who I'm talking about. Like, you'll see plenty of actors in this one where you're like, oh, that guy. Oh, her. Yeah.
Like, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Like, if you were to just show me a bunch of headshots of those actors, probably the one that I would have the hardest trouble naming is Brian Benben, because I don't think I've seen him in anything other than this.
He was, at the time, the star of an HBO show called Dream On.
Is this the one that had, like, the random clips of, like, old movies cut into it?
It was the cutaways, in a sense, were like they do on Family Guy, where he would say something that would cut away to something that illustrated his point. But yes, it was always old movie clips, because the whole concept is relayed through the opening credits, where he was put down in front of a television set as a kid and just watched TV all day. And so this is how his brain worked. It's essentially how we all function most of the time. So, yeah, he was a very relatable character. Now, the thing is, I didn't have HBO, and the only reason I even knew the concept of it was Dream On was one of those shows where it gained immediate notoriety, not just for being funny, but because it was on HBO, they could show nudity. And so that became, you know, oh, hey, Dream On, that's the show with nudity. By the time I finally saw an episode, it was the cut up and syndicated version that was on one of the UHF channels. I
believe I remember seeing it on Comedy Central while waiting for episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000 to come on. Yeah.
There you go. So what they should do is, since they've gotten some episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000 on Netflix, they should get Dream On episodes and pair, you know, so I can watch one of those, and then I could watch Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Yeah, why not?
Make an evening of that. But anyway, Radioland Murders was, I mean, you know, it was sort of a big deal, because here it is. It's a George Lucas story, a George Lucas idea, and it was, and this is where it gets a little murky, because the story about why Radioland Murders was even made has never been definitively established. You know, it's one of those sort of classic Lucas stories where, depending on the time period you speak to him, the reasoning changed. The original story I heard, and I don't know if you've heard this, is that there was always an option for another movie to be released through Universal, and it had never been cashed in. And so this was Lucas's way of finally honoring that obligation so many years later. He said, hey, Universal, you want to make this? And they said, yeah. That was the story that I heard, but I've also read other things where he said, no, this was just a cute idea that I had, and I wanted Willard and Gloria to write it. And so we just went ahead and did it, and Universal was just the right one to release it with. And something you pointed out as we were getting ready for this is that if you look at the credits for this, a lot of this is sort of a testing bed for what was to come with the prequels in terms of who was going to work on it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not that familiar with the history. The first time I was ever sort of exposed to this was, you know, back around that time, you know, maybe a year or so before this thing came out, is when I started subscribing to the Lucasfilm fan club, you know, magazine, which was amazing. And you know, they talked about it in there, because it's like, hey, we've got a new movie coming out from Lucasfilm. That doesn't happen every day. And, you know, it's like, it's this thing, Radioland Murders. And I remember, like, reading about it and thinking, like, that's interesting. It's not Star Wars, so I'm not really interested in it, you know, beyond the fact that it's George Lucas, but I could, you know, definitely see myself seeing this. I also remember reading back in the 90s about this, mythical movie called Red Tails, which, maybe one day would be made, and one day was
Yeah.
made. And, I saw it a couple years after, it was released on, DVD or whatever because of the whole Lucas thing and all that stuff. But I was really surprised. I think we've talked about this book, the George Lucas interviews, where it's like a compilation of interviews from George Lucas from throughout the years in various magazines and newspapers and whatnot.
Yes.
There's a whole series of these books for directors, and all of them are amazing. There's, a Soderbergh one, there's a Spike Lee one, all this stuff. And, in the George Lucas one, there are a lot of interviews from back in the Star Wars days, which are very, very fascinating since, like you're saying, he kind of likes to revise his history as well as his movies. And there's talk, from what I recall, way back, like maybe even pre-Star Wars, about this movie called Radioland Murders, which he's planning on doing.
I believe you're right, but yes, it is in the 1970s he's talking about that movie.
Yeah.
And it's very apparent that it's sort of in the DNA of this, that it has a similar sort of approach to storytelling that he was doing with American Graffiti, where it's many different characters and plot lines going on at the same time, running parallel to each other until it all comes together at the end.
Yeah.
And it's pretty frenetic.
Right, and what you're saying, I mean, like, this is something which I remember reading, I think probably in the Lucasfilm Fan Club magazine or whatever, is that they were using Radioland Murders as a way to test a lot of, new technology and stuff like that, which they were planning on implementing in the prequels in a very similar way that they were doing with the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles.
Right.
And, if you look at it, yeah, there are a lot of people who worked on both, I mean, because this would have been, well, right around the same time. I don't know if it was simultaneously with, Young Indiana Jones, or if it was like a year later or something. I know that Young Indiana Jones has the longest on location shoot in history or something like that,
Yeah.
It's crazy. So they were doing that show forever, but, David Tattersall is the director of photography. Rick McCallum is the producer. Gavin Bocquet is the production designer, And all of these people would go on to do, episode 1. So it's kind of a prequel to the prequels.
In many ways it is. But just, here we are, we're talking about the behind-the-scenes stuff. Do you want to let people know what Radioland Murders is all about?
Sure. It's the opening night, or whatever you want to call it, for a new national radio station in Chicago. It's a Chicago radio station which is going to go national. They're going to become the 4th national network on radio, and it's the opening night, and basically the advertisers are upset about the content, and the writers need to rewrite the content on the fly. The head writer is getting a divorce from one of the producers or producer assistant. I mean, she's basically the woman running the show. I forget what her title
Production
is.
manager. No,
production
but
manager.
manager's in her title, but yeah, basically production manager.
Production manager, yeah. And on top of all of this crazy stuff which goes into, producing live radio, there's a murderer on the loose, and they are killing various people associated with the production. And, there's a whole investigation, and it's like a whodunit, on top of everything else which is going on. And hijinks literally ensue.
Yes, because, of course, the main character winds up being accidentally incriminated in everything up to a certain point, and then comes up with a perfectly rational explanation for everything, because we as the audience, of course, know he's innocent, and the cops buy into his explanation, and then something else happens. And, of course, everything starts unraveling after that point. But what's very interesting about it is that central love story is it has a lot of shades of both the sort of period love story that informed Han Solo and Princess Leia in The Empire Strikes Back, but it also has shades of Lucas, who hadn't gone through his they're because between the time when he first talked about Radioland Murders in the 70s and then when this comes out, his marriage had fallen apart. And so, I think that if you look at it, you can really see him. He didn't write the script, but with Lucas, even if he doesn't write the script, you know that he's helping shape things. And there's very much an echo, I think, of maybe something that was familiar about the way that couples can argue with each other. All that to say that the main relationship problems all seem very realistic for, a married couple that, is having issues, as it were. So, I think that's an interesting component of it as well, because I think that you also see that later reflected in the prequels as he continues to work out those issues so many years later, that he was working out, having to do with why a relationship might not be good and healthy and the right one to be in.
Yeah, you can definitely see that. You can definitely see the Lucas touch, throughout this. He is kind of like a showrunner in a lot of ways, and putting his sort of stamp on things, even though it was directed by Mel Smith, who I think is probably better known as an actor than a director. He's the guy from Princess Bride, the albino from Princess Bride.
Mm-hmm.
But he also directed my all-time favorite movie, Bean. And by that, I mean my all-time least favorite movie. Like, literally, whenever someone's like, what's the worst movie you've ever seen? My go-to is always Bean.
The Mr. Bean movie?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's not a bad choice for the worst choice. Yeah.
And, I think there are a number of people who kind of consider this to be their all-time least favorite movie. I'm exaggerating, but there's a lot of people who really do not like this movie.
And that kind of blows my mind. I loved it the first time I saw it, and I really enjoyed it this time. What was your reaction to it?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed it. And it was weird because, like, I think I even had the DVD back in the day and everything, and it was one of those movies which I had seen like 2 or 3 times in the past, and was like, that's a fun movie, but I was never crazy in love with it. And when I was watching it, I was watching it with my wife, who had never seen it, didn't know anything about it, and it starts up, and both of us were like really into it, and I started thinking to myself, like, why is it that people dislike it, but also why is it that I wasn't crazy in love with it before? Because I'm really responding to it a lot now, and it then keeps on going, and I kept on looking at my watch and thinking, like, when is this thing gonna end? When is this thing gonna start wrapping up? And my wife said, like, the longer this thing goes on, the less I like it, And I still enjoy it, but I can definitely see why I wasn't crazy in love with it before. I think that they could have trimmed a good 10 minutes out of it, and it probably would have been better. There's a few scenes, a few gags, which go on way too long, and, I don't understand why Roger Ebert gave it only 1 star. I mean, that's kind of mind-boggling in a lot of ways.
That is mind-boggling.
I don't think that it's, fantastic either,
I think it's above average, honestly.
Well, I do too. Yeah.
I respond to the humor in it. But I mean, there are times where it can be, pretty easy to make me laugh. I like a good pratfall and stuff like that. I agree with you that it loses steam near the end. The impression that I always got of it, and that I had of it this time as well, is it's sort of like going to see like a comedy play. As short as this movie is, an intermission, like a 10-minute intermission, would have benefited it, because I think that what it reminded me of was Noises Off, which is, if you've ever seen that on stage, there are a lot of comedies unless they're musicals, where by the time, and even some of the musicals and musical comedies that you see, by the time it gets to 3/4 of the way through, you're like, okay, I figured out the gag. Let's go home now. Let's get this done. I don't think that this ever reaches the point of annoyance for me. I wasn't checking my watch, but the laughs become harder to come by the resolution. And then the resolution feels a little off in the sense that I don't think that they needed to go for the cultural reference they did at the end. Having to do, and this isn't really a spoiler, because basically the whole thing is amusing on how radio was killed by TV. And so there's very much a big piece of it at the end that is centered on this idea that TV is going to kill radio. And it's to go that far and find out that's the gag behind it all. It feels a little forced, because to have it just be, and TV killed radio. It's like, we all kind of know, we could have put something else. Like, you could have added a layer onto this one.
I guess so, but I mean, I kind of liked that. I sort of liked, them placing it into this sort of like historical context and everything. I thought that was kind of interesting, actually. That was part of the thing that I responded to. I guess.
I get maybe what I don't respond to is just the structure of the ending around the television. Like, if it had come out that the television, minor spoilers here. I mean, it's a comedy movie, and you sort of figure out the gag, by about halfway through. But basically, all of the killings are for revenge, for a patent on a thing that was killed by the people that are being, killed in this. And it of course all has to do with television. It's not so much that that's the problem as where it specifically ends up. I think, because it centers around an actual television, I think that is probably the part that comes across as forced to me. Does that make sense?
I guess so. I can see that. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. But, I mean, I guess we're kind of like focusing on a lot of the stuff that didn't work, but there is a lot of stuff in here which I think does work.
Oh, absolutely. There is a lot. I mean, like you said, the idea that Ebert gave this 1 star is mind-boggling. I don't get that at all.
No, me
because
either.
There are some legitimate great laughs. And of course, like I said, a lot of the actors, you're like, oh, that guy, oh, her, yes, I know them. But the guy who plays the lead detective, he's hysterical. He's a scene stealer. He gets it 100% right. I think that there's a lot of pacing and a lot of the comedic moments, of Brian Benben hiding under the table while Jeffrey Tambor is hiding behind the curtains. It's that very classic sort of thing, and that's what really reads as a stage play to me. But those sorts of things always really work well. They're always fun. And I think that the writer's room is tremendously funny with Bobcat Goldthwait in it.
Yeah,
and
he's
seeing
great.
The writers, and
Peter McNichols
come up with
in
everything,
there.
and having the moment where the actors start going off on their own, and that you show Bobcat Goldthwait in the writer's room saying, "The actors are improvising," and he like runs off. It's like, that's a cute moment.
Yeah, he was really good in this.
Yeah.
Definitely, for sure, he was a highlight for me. But yeah, I mean, you're right that there's like so many. I mean, Stephen Tobolowsky and all those people, Michael McKean and everything.
Yes, any movie with Michael McKean is instantly better. Corbin Burnson's in it.
Yeah, Brian James.
Yeah, that's right.
All that
that's
stuff.
Right.
I mean, it's
Ned Beatty.
Yeah, Ned Beatty. Yeah, it's a stellar cast for sure. And everyone is bringing it. Christopher Lloyd, who's got a really,
oh gosh, as the sound guy he's fantastic.
Yeah. And the other elements of it I think are all very well done too. I mean, we've talked about how Lucas is a good editor, and this movie is very well put together. I mean, yeah, we're talking about how it kind of drags and maybe you could tighten it up, but as far as like scene construction is concerned and stuff like that, I think it's very well done. The look, creating that sort of, like 30s Art Deco, radio station aesthetic thing. I mean, it's beautiful. Gavin Bocquet, who did, episode 1 and then everything, well, all the prequels, I guess, right? And the photography is very nice too. It's got a very sharp, clean look, with, some pretty bold colors and everything. It reminded me a lot of like episode 2, David Tattersall. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff in here. A lot of stuff which is, sort of goes above and beyond what you would expect in this type of movie. This kind of like little comedy. A lot of like visual effects. I mean, that was like one of the things where, reading that Lucasfilm magazine where they're like, they're trying out visual effects which are going to be used in episode 1, and I'm like, where, like, how? And I mean, looking at it now, it's still, but I get the impression that there's probably a lot of hidden visual effects which we weren't even aware of, just like there were
sure.
in the prequels, and he was probably trying a lot of stuff out that way. There's also, like, if you listen to the sound, there are tons of sound effects which are taken right out of Star Wars movies or Indiana Jones movies, very easily identifiable. One which, I mean, a lot of, like whip cracks or gunshots or whatever, ambient noise. But the one that really kind of blew my mind was at one point you hear the Wampa growl.
Which part is that?
It was like part of the sound guy's stuff, right? He's doing something.
Okay, yes.
And they're they go into a cavern and, there could be a monster in there or something. And you hear a Wampa. It's weird. It's weird. I mean, they just went into that Lucasfilm catalog, that Skywalker sound catalog, and
the script
stuff out.
The script also has some very deft. There's a very, 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 very sly Howard the Duck reference in it, where they say men, women, children, and ducks, and I was like, oh, there's no way that's not a Howard the Duck reference, like because Hoyk and Katz wrote Howard the Duck, so there's no way that's not a reference. But then at the end, you have an "I love you, I know" callback with Mary Stuart Masterson saying, "What kind of a response is that?" And they get into another fight, and it's funny because I consider it's not just a callback to Empire Strikes Back, but to the fact that Lucas fought that line being included until it was shown to a test audience that went nuts for it, and he turned and looked at Kirshner and said, "Yeah, I guess you were right," and they kept the line in there. No, seriously, because that was, everybody knows Harrison Ford improvised that on the set. Carrie Fisher was actually upset. There's an out-of-print book called Once Upon a Galaxy by 20th Century Fox unit publicist. I think Alan Arnold was his name.
Yeah.
But in it, he documents that Fisher got upset. She's like, "What kind of, come on, this is crazy." And Lucas pushed back, and he was like, that's not what it says in the script. We can't use that. And Kirshner was saying, no, this is fantastic. People are going to love it. It's wonderful. It's off the cuff. It's unexpected. And so to have that referenced here, including her reaction of saying that's a ridiculous reaction, feels very much like Lucas being very self-aware and working with them as they write the script. And they only wrote the first draft of the script because there are 2 other screenwriters credited on this.
Yeah, so, they probably wrote one back in the 70s and then wrote another one in like the 90s or whatever, polished it up.
That's probably accurate.
Yeah.
That's probably accurate. But yes, you can feel that Lucas's hand is on there, making sort of like a double reference to Empire Strikes Back there.
Also, the opening, I mean, I know it's a musical number and everything, but even like the way that the credits and the title are sort of like placed on the screen and everything was very, very reminiscent of Temple of Doom.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The thing is, as I'm thinking back on it, yeah, we kind of hammered on how it sort of runs out of steam, as it keeps going. But man, there really are a lot of really good gags in it. And I think that also what it foretells is the sense of humor that informed some of what people didn't like about episode 1. Specifically with how it was expressed with Jar Jar. Like, you see a lot of those sensibilities because it was Lucas's whole intention that Jar Jar was going to be a Buster Keaton-like character. And you can see a lot of those pratfalls and silly humor and stuff that makes sort of the more childish side of you laugh rather than, it being, erudite adult humor, as it were.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess, here it's so fast-paced, almost like Empire Strikes Back, with the sort of like screwball comedy nature, and, the timing, I think, is a bit better. I mean, it's hard, I think, in the digital realm to get comic timing down on things like pratfalls,
I completely agree. I think that, that's a whole conversation for a whole other day. But I agree with you. You can't. I think that comedy is something that absolutely will always require a live human actor to portray, because if we have to take the leap of believing that the character exists and then you try to sell it as a comic character, that's basically 2 leaps you're trying to make us take. We already know we're sitting in an unreal environment, and then to ask us to take 2 more leaps is a little much. Yeah,
and certainly there are like exceptions in different types of. There's lots of cartoons out there which are very funny, but for something like that, integrating it with live action and everything, it's tough.
Yeah, it's definitely... it absolutely is. It absolutely is.
Yeah.
So, final thoughts. Would you recommend Radioland Murders to somebody who's never seen it before? Would you say, you know what? Yeah, you should go check this out.
Yeah, I would. For one thing, I think it is a very entertaining movie. Even if it does, have its flaws, it's still better than most movies. It's still funnier than most movies. I think a lot of the actors are very charming, in particular, like Mary Stuart Masterson and stuff like that. But I don't think that it's a fantastic movie. I don't think that it's one of Lucas's best or one of Lucasfilm's best. It's definitely not their worst either. I'd watch this over Willow any day of the week. You know what I mean?
And now, what? You know what? We're gonna watch Willow then. We're gonna watch Willow.
Why can't we watch like
seal
Tucker
the deal,
Man
man.
in His Dream? Why are we? Oh, we should watch Tucker Man in His Dream. Anyway,
I've never seen that actually.
Oh, seriously?
Seriously, I've never seen it.
It's pretty badass. Yeah, you like it.
Okay,
you like it.
All
it's
right.
Good.
Well, you'll get to watch Willow, and I'll get to watch Tucker Man in His Dream.
Yeah, but see, I've seen Willow. That's
but you spoke ill of Willow, so I must punish you.
Oh, I spoke illo? Oh, okay. Remind me not to do that again. Willow was fantastic.
Too late. You can't unring that bell, Mike.
Okay, but Willow makes Radioland Murders look like Tucker Man in His Dream. You know what I mean? This Radioland Murders is a very solid movie, and I do think as presumably people who are listening to this are Star Wars fans, and I think historically speaking, it is fascinating to look at this in the context of a bunch of people trying to figure out how to make episode 1 and sort of getting their feet wet in that realm, and just kind of like seeing the seeds being planted for what would come 5 years down the road. So yes, I would definitely recommend Radioland Murders. I'm assuming you would too.
I absolutely would. I think that it's fun. I think that it's silly, and I think that there are worse ways to spend your evening than to turn this on. Do I think that after watching it you're going to go out and buy it and add it to your Blu-ray collection? No, probably not. But it really is worth seeing. At least once. Give it a spin. It might really ring funny for you, but at the very least, like Mike said, you'll get to see the creative team for episode 1 figuring things out, and it's fascinating from that aspect as well. So that's our thoughts on Radioland Murders. Mike, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K, or you can find me on my website, commentarytrackstars.com, doing Commentary Track Stars. And you can find me on talkfilmsociety.com, doing Soderbergh 2828, where we talk about the movie Kafka, which was designed by Gavin Bocquet. And there is a story there about how while he was designing Kafka, Bocquet talked to Soderbergh and was like, "Hey, George Lucas offered me a job doing production design on Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, but I don't really know if I want to make that commitment." And Soderbergh was like, "Just do it. What do you have to lose?" And then Bocquet got the job designing Star Wars Episode 1. So, hey, if it weren't for Kafka, there would be no Radioland Murders designed by Gavin Bocquet. Anyway,
there you go.
You can listen to our Kafka episode where we talk a lot about the design, I think, over there on talkfilmsociety.com. And you can also find me on Trek.fm, where I do a show called Stage 9 with you.
That's right, with me. I'm over co-hosting Stage 9 with you on Trek.fm, which is this show, but for Star Trek creators. It's a lot of fun. We get a little zany over there sometimes on our own. So yeah. we have a good time. And you can also find me right here on the network co-hosting Aggressive Negotiations with Matthew Rushing, which is a Star Wars show of a different flavor where we delve into the weirdness of the Star Wars galaxy. And you can find me co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig, where we're just a little bit insane. And look for me at as Kessel Junkie or at kesseljunkie.com. So join us next week where we talk about a controversial blog over on kesseljunkie.com about Lucas versus the Story Group.